Today's reading from Conversations with Yogananda is number 47. Now, this is a very interesting reading in a way, if a little more difficult, at least for me to speak about, because it is about obedience. Now, obedience is a very interesting thing in the sense that it's a very unpopular thing if we speak about the modern culture. Traditionally in India, or traditionally in the spiritual path, I should say, whether of East or West, be it the Franciscan monks in Italy or any monasticism tradition, or obviously the Indian tradition, there has been much has been said, and much importance has been given to obedience. But now what's happening now is that especially the Western culture has a certain peculiarity to it, which is it's very focused on the ego, on the individual, on what makes me special as compared to you or to that person or to that person. And that is how the culture has developed. For good or for evil, it has good things and bad things about it. We won't speak about that. And, you know, this culture from the West of individualism, of ego-centeredness, is translating into the whole of the world. So the topic of obedience, it is a little more delicate these days. And it is even more important to understand because of this. Now, this reading is a little longer. It takes 2 pages. So I'll read by parts and comment as I go. So it's number 47. What about monastic obedience? A disciple once asked the master. Obedience is important, the master replied, if it is given unconditionally. However, it should be given only to one who is wise, preferably to the guru, who is sent by God. Otherwise, obedience may actually weaken and not strengthen the will. If the devotee suppresses his nature instead of trying to expand it, he diminishes himself as a human being with no corresponding increase of spiritual awareness. So right off the bat, Yogananda starts by saying obedience is important. But what does he say after? If you are going to do unconditional obedience to somebody, then you need to make sure that person is a wise person, and he says preferably the guru. Now, in India, again, it is a very well-known fact, a very strong in tradition, that the guru needs to be given unconditional obedience. But again, with regards to today's culture, whether in the West or in India or anywhere that the Western culture has started to touch, it is a very difficult thing to understand why. If in the spiritual path we're looking for freedom, we're looking for, expansion, we're looking for all these things, how does it fit to give your unconditional obedience to someone else, to the guru? Is that freedom not being caged when you do that? Well, there are many different ways to answer that question. So let me look first for the easiest one right now. Now, imagine you want to climb, let's say Mount Everest, but any mountain climbing will do, and you have no experience whatsoever. Yeah, let's say just a small hill. It doesn't have to be Mount Everest. And you have no experience whatsoever, and the ascent is pretty much vertical. So, having no experience, no knowledge, and nothing like that, obviously you go and find somebody who can help you, a coach or mountain climber expert or whatever. Those things must exist, I don't know. But you look for somebody who can guide you. Now, if this person is telling you, no, you don't do it like that, do it like this, and don't put your foot there, put it here, even though for you, as an unexperienced mountain climber, it looks like putting your foot there is a great idea, but your guide will tell you, that's a terrible idea. What will you do? Of course, you have to listen, because he has all the experience, he has all the knowledge, and the only thing he's doing is looking out for your life. That is the only thing he's doing. And anybody with a little bit of common sense, especially in a situation which is life and death like that, will listen to what the mountain climber guide will say. Well, now in the spiritual path, it is the exact same principle. Now, why does it seem so different? Because falling from a hill is deadly. most of the time, I would say. But the consequences in the spiritual path are much more subtle. You cannot see them, you can only experience them um, over time in very, very much subtle ways. So the cause and effect of not doing the right thing is not always so easy to distinguish. And that is why the obedience to the guru has become a very important, it's a very important part of the spiritual path, because he knows, he is like that mountain climber who has been sent, has been attracted to you, you could say, to again preserve your life. And this is not your physical life necessarily, but your spiritual life, to make sure that you don't misstep, to make sure that you don't fall and crush yourself against the rocks of ignorance. Yeah, so that is one way to see why obedience to the guru is important. Now, the other way, well, we can actually take this same analogy again. The mountain climber who is experienced, he knows the way, and you don't. That's very simple, very easy, and that's just the way it is. So he can tell you where to go also, which way to take. And the guru, letting that analogy aside now, the guru is not only a mountain climber teacher, he's also the person, whether you know it or not, he is the one who knows you the most, because he knows not only your personality, which you may know, he knows not only your thoughts, which you may know, but he knows also your deeper nature. When you are obeying the guru, in spite of whatever you feel like doing, whatever your desires, whatever this is, it's because the guru is looking at you and seeing a need which is deeper than anything you could have yourself imagined. Now, here in Ananda Sangha, we very often get put in positions that we're not necessarily wanting or expecting or even have enthusiasm for, but we know the value of positive attitude, we know the value of cooperation, so we do it, we take it as a spiritual lesson. And more often than not, we realize that those things which were given to us, in spite of we not wanting them, they were the best for us. And they have benefited us in sometimes in obvious ways, but more often in not so obvious ways. We have become more spiritual, we have become more happy, we have come closer to God often. So, let us go on. Oh yes, no, let us not go on, because we're talking about obedience to the guru, but he says unconditional obedience should only be given to somebody wise or the guru, because what happens when you give your unconditional obedience to somebody who is not wise is that the willpower is weakened, which is what Yogananda said here. And that is one problem actually with spiritual organizations, because whoever is higher up the scale hierarchically, it does not necessarily mean that they are more advanced or less advanced. It's just that they're filling a position in the administrative way of things. So when it is not the guru who is giving us our instructions on somebody who is very much in tune with the guru, like Swami Kriyananda was for us, like some of our Nayaswamis, Nayaswami Jayaji or others are, then it is always good to use your own discrimination. Swami Kriyananda had this very nice phrase he used to use. Instead of obedience, he would use the term cooperative obedience. There are many implications to this, but one of the implications is that one has to have common sense. See, one has to have common sense. If he would often use the extreme example of the Nazis, whenever they were doing all these atrocities, the soldiers, they were doing it in the name of obedience, and that was their excuse to do it. We were just following orders. Well, if you follow that kind of order, what does it make of you? Does it elevate you spiritually? No, it really sinks you. And so that's why we should always use our discrimination and our common sense. Even the guru will not be displeased if you question. There are two ways of questioning. One is the doubting. That is not good. But the second way of questioning is when you desire sincere understanding. You do not understand what's going on, and you want to know out of a sincerity of knowing what the Guru's will actually is. So let's think about that, and let's go on. Wise guidance never violates people's free will. A superior who demands obedience of his subordinates should show respect for their capacity to understand, and also for their innate right to their own free will. Now, Yogananda's comment stops, and Kriyanandaji's comments on that start. It seems to me, as I reflect on this advice, that subtly included in it also is a suggestion that obedience must be given willingly and joyfully. Indeed, the Master always said it should be. With that combination, willingness and joy, even if something one is asked to do conflicts with his own desires and more fundamentally with his actual needs, obedience to others can help one to develop great spiritual strength. This felicitous result can be reached, however, only if one offers his every action to God, for the goal of the spiritual path is self-transcendence, not self-suppression. It implies, that is to say, ever-diminishing identification with the little ego and ever-increasing expansion in infinity. Now, there are two things here that, first of all, somebody who is worth giving your obedience to will never force their will upon you. They will never force you to do anything. And again, and to go on the second part of that, that Swamiji adds that the obedience should be offered willingly and joyfully. And that goes in a very deep spiritual truth, which is that sometimes, and very often, most of the time, it does not matter so much what you do it, but the attitude and the attitude with which you have done it. So after all of this discourse about you should not give your obedience to somebody, unconditional obedience to somebody who's not wise, then Swami Kriyananda interjects and says, well, if your obedience is given with willingness and joy, then even so, you may gain spiritually. Of course, provided that what you have been asked to do is not to your detriment. And that is because it has been done with the right attitude. Now, there's a story of Paramahansa Yogananda when he was very new at his ashram, at Swami Sri Yukteswar's ashram, meaning his guru's ashram. And at some point, Yoganandaji decided to leave the ashram and go to the Himalayas and try to meditate and find God there. And Sri Yukteswar, his guru, very quietly said, very, very quietly, but very obviously said, you will not find what you seek there, you should stay here. And Yoganandaji ignored that advice and left. So you see, first of all, Sri Yukteswar, he expressed his wishes. He knew what was best for his disciple, but he did not force the issue. He left it to his disciples' free will to make that choice. Now, Yoganandaji waited, and he was away for 1 year, and then came back to the ashram. And when he came back to the ashram, he came very meekly and saying, Guruji, I'm back. And Sri Yukteswar said, well, what did he say? Oh, good. He didn't say good, but he says something like, hello, let's say hello. Let us go for a walk in the Ganges. And that was it. He was not displeased. He was not offended. He was not... he didn't have any negative reaction to the fact that Yogananda had disobeyed him. He simply accepted it and respected his disciples' free will. So in that sense, one can often see who is worth giving their obedience to, on a spiritual sense at least, because there is that respect. They will never, in other words, they will never force their will upon you. That is what will weaken your own will. They always try to strengthen your own will through their good advice, which then you're free to follow or not. If you're wise, you will follow it. If you're not wise, you'll wander for 1 year or more. And then the other part of it is when you have the right attitude. Sometimes, like in this case, Paramahansa Yogananda has passed on, which we consider our guru. And sometimes it's not very easy to find out what is the right thing to do, what is not the right thing to do, and who's the right person to obey, who's not the right person to obey. And that's when the attitude comes in. We do it willingly and joyfully. Because the truth is, when you have the right attitude, everything else works out. It doesn't matter if you made, it matters a little if you made a mistake for sure, but the attitude, the positive attitude that you put in, the wanting, sincerely wanting to do the right thing, will draw grace from God that will actually put you in the right path. The example I gave earlier about we at Ananda Sangha always doing all sorts of odd jobs that we don't necessarily like or want at the beginning, but they always turn out for our benefit. That is a perfect example because there's a high amount of willingness and positivity in Ananda Sangha, and that is why these things always turn out good. And if that job is not right for that person, it will get removed. And it just works out very nicely, and we all benefit spiritually that way. Now let us finish this reading. Ego motivation, Paramahansa Yogananda taught, is the supreme obstacle on the spiritual path. The true benefit of obedience for the devotee is that it helps one to overcome attachment to littleness. This is the negative, but ever necessary side of renunciation. The positive side is its encouragement toward channeling all of one's aspirations to God. The addition of a positive direction is essential. The prayerful plea that God do all of one's redemptive work for one encourages passivity. One's will must be strengthened rather than quashed. Never has there been a true saint whose will was flaccid. After the Master's words on the contrast between the bullock cart and the airplane approaches to spiritual development, he added, to attain spiritual realization, effective meditation techniques are necessary. So to take it to a conclusion there, one of the most beautiful actually aspects of obedience, we were talking at the beginning about the cultural tendency these days is worldwide of giving a lot of emphasis to myself, my own individuality, my independence from everyone around me and everything around me, and what makes me unique and special as compared to the other people. And somebody who can willingly and joyfully give their obedience to somebody else, with the right attitude, with positivity, they are making quite a leap toward transcending their ego. See, giving your obedience to somebody, in a way, it is expressing or acknowledging that somebody other than you, perhaps they have something good to say, that perhaps I am not the ultimate word, ultimate truth of everything. And so it helps you take you out of yourself in a way. And Swamiji speaks of that as the negative side of renunciation. Negative not in a bad way, but meaning that which contracts. Again, not in a bad way. There are always two poles to everything, and it's just the wording. One is negative, one is positive. Doesn't have to be bad and good. But the positive side, he said, is that in addition to this, we cannot only pray for everything to be done for us. We cannot only have everybody or somebody tells us everything we need to do because we'll become passive. We also need to put our own effort, and that is why this reading ends with the Master's words, Yoganandaji's words, which is that effective meditation techniques are necessary. So you can say that all that advice, all that things that you're supposed to be obedient to, you can say that is God or the Guru reaching out their hand to you. But it is not enough for the Guru or for God to reach out their hand. You also have to reach out your own hand and grab it. And that is the effort. That is why we meditate. That is why we put out the energy to have positive attitudes. And Swami Kriyanandaji put it in a very beautiful way. The grace of God, he said, is always there. Imagine the grace of God as the sunlight on the side of a building. The sunlight is always there, it's always shining, but if the curtains are closed, if the curtains of your heart, if the curtains of your mind are closed, then the sunlight will just not come in, even though it's already there. So that which amounts to our effort, to our meditation, and to our attitude, to simply open the curtains. God's grace is always there, it's always shining. It's up to us then to open the curtains and make it enter into the altar of our hearts. Joy to you.